Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to do literature. Yeah, as you know, Tuesday is always for literature, and we are going to look at our schedule. Today we're going to review chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3 is our focus for today. So you supposedly already read it. If not yet, now we're going to go review it today. For your pre-study for next week's Zoom meeting would be that you would read chapter 4. Okay? Yeah. So we can review that. So next week you will have quiz 2, which is about chapters 3 and 4. And today no quiz. We're just going to review chapter 3. We did chapter 2 last week. Yeah, awesome. Okay, first up we're going to go to the Odyssey. So look at Spark Notes. So that is the novel information that you see here. This is this link which you can also access. Please also look over the narrative text summary. I gave you this last week and we talked about this already last week. Remember that we now, English has changed into 3 parts as literature, informational text, and literary nonfiction. Yeah, very important. And then the narrative arc that I also taught you last week. And last week we also went over the difference between elements and techniques, that basically literary devices are consist of either techniques and elements, and the literary elements are the parts that make up the story. Remember, the rising action, falling action, there has to be conflict, there has to be an antagonist and a protagonist, there is a mood, a theme, there's characterization. All these things are going on in the story that are necessary for it to become a complete good story. And then the literary devices, as we were looking into metaphors, idioms, similes, onomatopoeia, personification, assonance, hyperbole, flash forward, backflash, foreshadowing, yeah, and so on. So all these devices, and those are the techniques that authors use to just create a deeper underlying meaning and or create effect. So we talked about that last week, and we're gonna today look at the turn of the story and trying to really understand what's going on. So we're just focusing still a little bit more on comprehension, whereas if it comes to the literary devices, we will go more into that while we are more furthering into the story. Okay, I'd like you to go with me to Spark Notes. We're gonna look at the summary first, yeah, before we go into the reading. Today we're gonna listen also to the audio that we have. That's kind of cool because then you can also hear the pronunciation. That, by the way, is a British accent, so that's different. What? Let me make this bigger for you. Awesome. Okay. So we're gonna take a look, a peek at, here it says book 3 is basically chapter 3. What is it that we're going over in chapter 3? Now, let me give you a recap. How far do we remember this? How far do we remember this? Okay, let's think. So, Telemachus is Odysseus' son. Odysseus is the king of Ithaca. And he has a son, Telemachus. He has a wife called Penelope. Okay? When Penelope just had a baby, Telemachus, Odysseus went off to the Trojan War. Yeah? The war took 10 years. They won the war. And then Odysseus and his friends wanted to go back. Well, they scattered. They all went their own way. Odysseus was supposed to give sacrifices to the gods, and he didn't do that. So the gods got angry, and on his way home, he's stranded on an island. He got shipwrecked, stranded on an island, and he couldn't go home for 10 years. 10 years it took him to try to find a way home. So by the time that he's on his way home, his son, Telemachus, is already in his 20s. Now, we started off with chapter 1 and 2. We read about how Athena, the god of wisdom and war, came to Telemachus. She had been a great help to Odysseus when he was stranded on the island. She came to Telemachus disguised as one of Odysseus' friends and kind of urged Telemachus to start looking for answers to where his father is. Many assumed that his father was dead, but she was like telling him, like, you cannot assume that he's dead. Go figure it out. Let's go to find his friends who were in the same war with your father, and let us find out what basically really happened with him. Because come on, you cannot just assume that he died, right? So that's what he does. He goes and tries to figure that one out. And then, so he goes to Pylos first, and there he meets the king. And then he goes to Sparta to figure out what happened to his dad. But in chapter 3, we're reading that the focus shifts, whereas in chapter 1 and 2, the focus is on Telemachus figuring out, assisted by Athena, figuring out where his dad is and what happened. Then in chapter 3, the author makes a shift of character from focusing on Telemachus. In chapter 1 and 2, we see that in chapter 3, the author starts actually focusing on Odysseus. That's about Odysseus leaving the island, being back on sea, and having the storm, almost dying, and reaching the shore, and finding a way back home. That is basically what happens in chapter 3 and then in 4. So it is interesting to see how Homer, which is the author of this book, basically makes a shift of focus on character. Yeah, so the first 2 chapters are about Telemachus figuring out where his dad is and what happened, and then in chapter 3 it is about Odysseus finding his way back home. Now we have a point of view. Remember that? That is one of the techniques, point of view, right? Or no, one of the elements. A story always has to have a POV, a point of view. Now it can either be the first or the third. If it's the first point of view, remember this. If it's the first point of view, it's the character telling the story from his, her perspective. So the character uses I, me, mine. It is a smaller scope. You kind of know more in depth about one character, what he feels, thinks, and does, and the motives are. But it's a more narrow scope, but more in depth, the bidalum. But if we're having the third POV, the third point of view, then it's the narrator who's telling the story. So the narrator uses he, she, and the names of the characters. So you have a broader perspective of more characters, but not as in depth as it would be the first POV. Okay, so I would like you to answer me, what POV has been used? Who can answer that? What POV is used in this story? Ricky, would you know? Ricky, do you know what the POV is in this story?
Third, miss?
Yeah, very good, Ricky. Thank you. It's a third POV. And can you give me evidence on how you know that? Can you read something, show something where you can see that is the evidence that it's the third? I can't hear you, Ricky. Can you unmute?
Yes.
Yeah, what is evidence? Tell me.
But then I can't hear you.
Oh, what is the evidence that shows that it's the third POV?
I can't hear you. My connection is not well.
Okay. Sorry. Dimas, can you give me an example of evidence that shows that this is written in the third POV?
The evidence is, wait, miss. Actually, as far as I know, the third is, the writer know everything about the events about the events, and the evidence is, I don't know how to say the evidence, but I know
Okay.
this search.
Now, what you explained just now is
Because
correct. Yeah, about?
yeah, because the writer didn't use a word I or a word I or first person, but always use the second and a third person. So it
Yeah.
means that it is from a perspective.
Very
So
good.
the
Thank
writer
you.
said,
Yeah. Good, Dimas. Yeah. So you can see that where the writer always uses the names. Yeah. Always mentions the names. Very good, Dimas. Thank you. Okay, let's look at the summary of chapter 3. So at Pylos, Telemachus, a mentor. Remember Athena? She's disguised as a friend of Odysseus, Telemachus' dad, which is called mentor. Yeah. So Telemachus, a mentor, witnessed an impressive religious ceremony in which dozens of bulls are sacrificed to Poseidon, who is the god of the sea. Although Telemachus has little experience with public speaking, Mentor gives him the encouragement that he needs to approach Nestor. Come on, talk to Nestor, who is the king of Pylos, and ask him about Odysseus. Now, Nestor, however, has no information about the Greek hero Odysseus. He recounts that after the fall of Troy, a falling out occurred between Agamemnon and Menelaus. So because they all went in their separate ways, that's why they kind of don't know what happened to each other. Some went back straight away, some stayed for a bit. So they all went their own ways. The two Greek brothers who led the expedition. Now, Menelaus set sail for Greece immediately, while Agamemnon decided to wait a day and continue sacrificing on the shores of Troy, like for the winnings they had. Now, Nestor went with Menelaus, while Odysseus stayed with Agamemnon. Yeah, and he has heard no news of Odysseus, so he doesn't know. So basically, in this case, King Nestor did not know anything about the whereabouts of Odysseus. He says that he can only pray that Athena will show Telemachus the kindness that she showed Odysseus. He adds that he has heard that suitors have taken over the prince's house in Ithaca, and that he hopes that Telemachus will achieve the renown in defense of his father that Orestes, son of Agamemnon, won in defense of his father. Yeah. So then Telemachus asks Nestor about Agamemnon's fate, like what happened. And Nestor explains that Agamemnon returned from Troy to find that Aegisthus, that is a coward who remained behind while the Greeks fought in Troy, he didn't want to go fight, had seduced and married his wife. Yeah, so this is basically something. Now, his wife Clytemnestra, with her approval, Aegisthus murdered Agamemnon, and he would have then taken over Agamemnon's kingdom and had not Ortisus, who was in exile in Athens, returned and killed Aegisthus and Clytemnestra. Nestor holds the courage of Orestes up as an example for Telemachus. Now, he sends his own son, Pisistratus, along to accompany Telemachus to Sparta. Now, this is not everything of this is in the book that you're reading. Some points are left out to make the book a little bit more shorter, yeah, the story. But still the main points are in it. But what you see in the story here is that, so first he goes to Pylos, yeah, to meet King Nestor to talk and ask, but then King Nestor doesn't know much about it. And then eventually Telemachus goes to Sparta in order to find what happens. And then by land, Athena, who reveals her divinity, yeah, in the form of Mentor and changing into an eagle before the entire court of Pylos, and stays behind to protect Telemachus' ship, because Telemachus will go by land on foot or however, he will go to Sparta to find the king of Sparta to figure out what happened with his dad. So he doesn't know yet what really happened with his father. So I think the chapters definitely go a little bit different from the chapters in our book because our story is more concise. Because in chapter 3, in the book that you're reading, it is about Odysseus trying to get home. So let's look here at book 4 real quick. In Sparta, the king and queen, so the king is Menelaus and the queen is Helen, are celebrating the separate marriages of their son and daughter. Now, they happily greet Pisistratus and Telemachus, the latter of whom they soon recognize as the son of Odysseus because of the clear family resemblance. Now, as they all feast, the king and queen recount with melancholy the many examples of Odysseus' cunning at Troy. So Menelaus fought with Odysseus at Troy. Okay, basically this whole war started because of Helen, because she was abducted and then married with someone else, and that's why when the Trojan War started, they had the war to get Helen back. So Helen recalls how Odysseus dressed as a beggar to infiltrate the city walls, and Menelaus tells the famous story of the Trojan horse, you know, the wooden horse that went inside with soldiers. Odysseus' masterful gambit that allowed the Greeks to sneak into Troy and slaughter the Trojans. So that was Odysseus' master plan. The following day, Menelaus recounts his own return from Troy. He says that stranded in Egypt, he was forced to capture Proteus, the divine old man of the sea, and Proteus told him the way back to Sparta and then informed him of the fates of Agamemnon and Ajax, another Greek hero who survived Troy only to perish back in Greece. Now, Proteus also told him the news of Odysseus, that he was still alive, but was imprisoned by Calypso on her island. Buoyed by his report, Telemachus and Pisistratus returned to Pylos to set sail for Ithaca. So remember, Telemachus with Athena came to Pylos by ship, and because the king there couldn't give him any information, they went on by land to Sparta. And now they get all this information, know about King Menelaus and Helen, his wife, and they talked about what happened in Troy, how Odysseus and the others won the war by using the horse, right? And then with that information, Pisistratus and Telemachus go back to Pylos in order to go to their ship again and sail back to Ithaca, knowing that Odysseus is alive. So from this journey, they found out that Odysseus is still alive and is not dead yet and is on an island. And that was the whole idea and point of this travel, to figure out where Odysseus is and where he is still alive or not. Meanwhile, the suitors at Odysseus' house learn of Telemachus' voyage. They know that, oh, Telemachus went to figure out the truth, and prepare themselves to ambush Telemachus when he returns. The herald met and overhears their plan and reports them to Penelope. She becomes really distressed and distraught when she reflects that she may soon lose her son in addition to her husband, because these suitors who want to take over the kingdom by marrying Penelope and then becoming rich are going to try to kill Telemachus once he gets back, because they're afraid that Odysseus at one point will return if he's still alive. She becomes afraid of that. But Athena sends a phantom in the form of Penelope's sister, Iphthame, to reassure her. Now, Iphthame tells her not to worry, for the goddess will protect Telemachus. So that's the whole idea. So these suitors are plotting against Telemachus because they want to get, the kingdom. Now, if it comes to the character list, you guys can really look at it. This is just an overview of the characters basically that are in the story that are important. You have some characters that if you would want to, you could go in depth. In depth means libidinum, penjelasannya, the analysis of Odysseus. You could click it here and then you can know more about the character Odysseus himself. Now, he's clearly the protagonist because he's like the main character. Yeah. And then the interesting thing is, Telemachus is his son, right? Penelope, the wife, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and battle, Poseidon, the god of the sea, Zeus, the king of gods and men. Now we have here a lot of the suitors mentions: Antinous, who's arrogant, Eurymagus, Amphinomus, Eumaeus, I don't think you want to name your kids like this. Euryclea. These are very weird names, yeah? Melanthius and so on. And now, there's a whole lot of characters that will come back into the story. Now, you have to also understand that, this is interesting, that the suitors who are in Ithaca trying to marry Penelope to take over the kingdom are basically, if we might say it, let me see if I see that here. Now, Poseidon, the god, Poseidon is angry with Odysseus. Why? Because in a fight, Odysseus kind of makes Poseidon's son blind. So in a fight, Odysseus fights against Poseidon's son, and then the son becomes blind. So that's why Poseidon is so angry at Odysseus. So in a way, the suitors that are at his kingdom, trying to take over his kingdom, are the mortal antagonists in the story who are against Odysseus. But this story is kind of unique because there are also immortal or divine antagonists. So Poseidon is the divine antagonist, which is against Odysseus as a god. And then we've got the mortal human antagonists, which are the suitors. Okay, so remember that we have two types of antagonists in the story. And this goes all the way down with all the examples of these different characters, which you can look into. Yeah, it's good to look into because it helps you to better understand the story. And I think that is important. Okay, I still made a PDF file from the story so we can read along. You can just open your own book, go to chapter 3, Leaving Calypso, that is page 20. And we are talking about Odysseus leaving his island. So basically what I read just now, which in the original book, chapter 3 and 4, was still about Telemachus returning. Telemachus from Pylos going to Sparta, and from Sparta going back to Pylos in order to return back to Ithaca, and the suitors trying to complot a plan to kill Telemachus, and Penelope being afraid, but being told not to worry. So that is basically in the original book up till chapter 4. Now we are in chapter 3 of our edition of the book, our adaptation of the book, which in chapter 3 talks about Odysseus leaving Calypso. Even well-built ships do not cross this endless sea. It would be mad to travel such a long distance in a homemade raft. That is what Odysseus says. Now I'd like to read a part of, listen to the audio part of it, and a part of it you guys are going to read yourself. Now I'm going to try to make this show and the audio at the same time. I don't know if that works. So please make sure you have your book open at page 20. Yeah. Let me see how this. Give me a chance to see if this works. Open it double. Come on.
Chapter 3, Leaving Calypso. Even well-built ships do not cross this endless sea. It would be mad to travel such a long distance in a homemade raft. While Athene was helping young Telemachus, Zeus sent his messenger Hermes to talk to the goddess Calypso. For many years, Odysseus had been an unwilling guest on Calypso's island. Outside Calypso's cave, Hermes stopped to admire the beautiful scene. A little stream ran between trees filled with birdsong, and flowers and fruit grew everywhere. A fire burned brightly at the cave's entrance, and inside he could hear Calypso singing. When she noticed the god entering her home, she said, "Hermes, you are welcome. Come and have something to eat, and tell me what brings you here." "I have been sent here by Zeus," he replied. "I had no wish to make this long journey across endless, empty sea with no cities or people on the way. But no one can refuse the orders of Zeus. This is Zeus's message. It is not Odysseus's fate to end his days on your island, so send him on his way without delay. He must continue his voyage to Ithaca." Calypso's body shook with sadness. Zeus is so unfair. He himself is allowed any number of human girlfriends. But if a goddess finds love with a human, he ends her happiness immediately. I saved Odysseus from death after his ship was destroyed in a storm. I welcomed him here on my island and looked after all his needs. I even offered to turn him into a god. But now Zeus orders me to let him go. Well, I must do it. I have no choice. But I have no boat to give him, and the voyage is long. I can only tell him the direction to take. Then send him on his way at once, and you will not have to worry about Zeus's anger." With these words, Hermes started his journey back to the palace of the gods.
Okay, these are short. Ini.
Calypso went at once to look for Odysseus. She found him sitting on the shore, crying for his lost home as usual. "Dry your tears," she said to him, "and waste no more of your life on this island that brings you no pleasure. I am ready to help you leave. Cut down some trees and make a raft. I will give you food and drink for your voyage. I will even give you a wind that will blow you to Ithaca, if more powerful gods do not stop me. Even well-built ships do not cross this endless sea," he replied. "It would be mad to travel such a long distance in a homemade raft. I will not do it. Or can you give me your word that this is not a trick to cause me more trouble?" Calypso smiled and touched his face with her hand. "How can you think that I would trick you like that? By the earth and the sky and by death itself, I promise you, I am just trying to help." After they had eaten together in the cave, she said, "So have you definitely decided to leave? Please think again. I know you miss your wife, Penelope, but you will have so much pain and suffering before you reach your homeland. Is it not better to stay here with me? A goddess is more beautiful than any human wife, and with me you can escape death forever by becoming a god." "Do not be angry with me, goddess," he replied. "Of course you are more beautiful than Penelope, but I want nothing more than to return home to my family. And I stopped worrying about the dangers of my journey long ago. I have suffered so much already. One more disaster means nothing to me now." When morning came, Calypso gave Odysseus some tools, and he started work on his raft. After 4 days of hard work, the raft was ready. It had a cloth sail and plenty of food and drink on board. A warm and gentle wind blew up at Calypso's command, and with a happy heart, Odysseus sailed out to sea. Keeping his eyes on the stars, he traveled east for 17 days without sleeping. And on the 18th day, the land of the Phaeacians came into view. But Poseidon, god of the sea, saw Odysseus on his raft, and the sight made him angry. It seems that the other gods have changed their minds about Odysseus, he said to himself. He has nearly reached the land of the Phaeacians, where his suffering is going to end. But I have not forgiven him for the harm he did to my son. It is not too late to send a little more trouble in his direction. With those words, he covered both land and sea with thick fog. Then he called all the winds together to make a violent storm, and enormous waves crashed down on Odysseus's raft. "O gods!" cried Odysseus, "have you not finished with me yet? Calypso's prophecy is coming true, that I will have more pain and suffering before I reach my homeland. How lucky were my companions who were killed at Troy. They died with their friends around them, and their names live forever. I am going to die in a sea storm, alone and forgotten." As he spoke, a wave the size of a mountain thundered down on him and threw him off the raft. The waters closed over his head. His clothes, a gift from Calypso, were heavy in the water and made swimming difficult. But at last he reached the air and coughed out the salt water from his mouth. With the last of his energy, he swam back to the raft and threw himself on board. He held on tightly, but the violent winds drove him in every direction, except to safety. Then Poseidon sent another enormous wave towards him. For a second or two, it hung above his head. Then it crashed violently down on the raft, throwing the wood in all directions. Odysseus held on to a piece of wood, kicked off his clothes, and bravely started swimming. Poseidon laughed when he saw this. "It's a long way to the coast, Odysseus, but swim there if you can. I have had my fun with you." Athene now sent the south, east, and west winds back to bed. She calmed the north wind, so it could blow Odysseus gently towards the land of the Phaeacians. For 2 days and 2 nights he swam. Time after time he thought he would die. But on the 3rd day, a wave lifted him a little, and he saw that land was near. He felt like a child who learns that his father, after suffering from a long and painful illness, has been cured. Odysseus felt a similar happiness when he saw the welcome sight of hills and trees. He swam more quickly in his excitement until he heard the thunder of the waves on the rocks ahead. Too late, he realized that there were no beaches to land on. There were only sharp walls of broken rock. An enormous wave lifted him towards them, and it looked like certain death. But luckily, he managed to save himself by catching onto a rock with both hands. The powerful wave soon pulled his hands away, and he was back underwater. He kicked hard to reach the air, Finally, he decided to swim further along the shore, although he was already so tired. At last, Odysseus came to a more welcoming coastline. He found the mouth of a stream, and there he landed safely. He fell to the ground, too weak to move. He lay there for some time, until he realized that it was getting late. With no clothes, he might freeze at night if he stayed where he was. But was he safer in the woods where wild animals might be looking for an easy supper? After some thought, he chose the warmer ground of the woods and looked for a suitable place to sleep. He found 2 trees growing together so tightly that their branches kept out the wind and sun and rain. Between these trees, he lay down and covered himself with a blanket of dry leaves. For the first time in 3 weeks, he fell asleep. As Odysseus slept, Athene went to the palace of Alcinous, the Phaeacian king. Alcinous had a young daughter called Nausicaa, as tall and beautiful as a goddess. Athene, disguised as one of Nausicaa's friends, went into her bedroom and whispered in her ear as she slept in her soft bed. "Nausicaa, why are you being so lazy? You will need lots of fine clothes when you are married, but all your clothes are lying around the palace unwashed. Let us go and wash them together in the morning. We must hurry. The young men from every good family in the land want to marry you, and your father will certainly choose a husband for you soon." Athene then returned to her home on Mount Olympus, and a little later Nausicaa woke up. Remembering the strange dream that she had had in the night, she immediately went to find her father. "Father, could I have one of the horses today, and a vehicle to carry our dirty clothes to the stream? Your own clothes need washing, and my brothers often ask for clean clothes to wear at their dances." She did not talk about her own marriage. She was too shy to discuss this matter with her father. But he understood completely and replied, "The servants will bring you what you need, my child." While the servants brought a vehicle and a horse, Nausicaa rushed around the palace, collecting her family's finest and most colorful clothes. Her mother packed her some food and wine for the trip, and soon Nausicaa and a group of her friends were on their way to the stream, talking happily. There were some deep pools in the stream, perfect for washing the clothes. The girls threw them into the water by the armful and started their work. When everything was clean, they stretched out the clothes on the beach. Then they bathed in the stream and sat down for some food while the sunshine dried the clothes. When they had finished their meal, they started playing a ball game, and Nausicaa sang the instructions. She looked like a young goddess, more beautiful than all the beautiful girls around her. The girls' voices woke Odysseus, and he got out of his bed between the trees to see what was happening. Luckily, he remembered that he was wearing no clothes, and used some leaves to hide his body. But he looked dirty and wild after his terrible days at sea, like a dangerous animal mad with hunger.
Okay, now we continue. I would like to ask Ricky to continue reading, if you can.
Yes, my connection is
Not so good,
kinda,
yeah.
yeah. Not so good.
Okay, Kevin, can you continue reading? Kevin Richbell? Kevin? Hello, Kevin.
Hello.
Hi, can you continue reading? When the girls...
Miss, I'm very noisy.
Okay, thank you. Dimas, can you continue?
Yes, miss. But from the girl's voice?
Yeah, here, yeah. When the girls saw him.
From the girl's voice spoke a distance, and he got out of his bed between the trees to see what was happening. Luckily, he remembered that he was wearing no clothes and used some leaves to hide his body. But he looked dirty and wild after his terrible days at sea, like a dangerous animal mad with hunger. When the girls saw him, they screamed and ran away. Only now Sichang stayed to face him. Continue, Miss, or
Yeah, one more.
Odysseus' first thought was to throw his arms around the beautiful girl's knees and ask her for help. But he did not want to upset her by touching her. Instead, he kept his distance and said, "Are you human or a goddess? I cannot guess the answer, since I have never seen such a beauty. If you have a human family, how lucky they are. What a pleasure they must feel when you dance in their company. And luckiest of all is the man who takes you home as his wife."
This is something maybe in Indonesia they would say what gombal or something like super exaggerating, like overly romantic. Yeah. Thank you, Dimas. Very good.
You're welcome.
Something there. Okay, we continue with Princess Karen. Can you continue reading, Karen?
Yes, miss. Princess, I must ask you for help. Yesterday, I arrived on this shore, carried here by the winds after 3 weeks on the stormy seas. My raft and my clothes are lost, and I know no one in this land. Pity me in my troubles. Tell me, please, how do I reach your city? And do you have anything that I can use for clothes? Sure, she replied. You will be given everything that you need. The king of this land is Alcinous, and I am his daughter. I will gladly show you the way to his palace.
Thank you. Yeah. Kamia, can you continue?
Yes, miss. I thank you with all my heart, answered Odysseus. Nausicaa now called to her friends. Come back, girls. There is nothing to fear. This man is an unlucky voyager, that we will help him, since all strangers are protected by Zeus. Odysseus washed his salty skin in the stream, while the girls looked for some clothes to give him. As he dressed clean at last, Athene used her powers to make him taller and stronger. With thicker hair, Nausicaa whispered to her friends, "When I first saw this man, I thought he was terribly unattractive. Now, though he looked more like the gods on Olympus, how I would like a man like this as my husband. Hurry now, girls. Take him something to eat and drink."
Yeah, thank you. What you see in the story basically is that Homer, the author, writes a lot about the interference of gods with man. Like it's as if these gods derail humans, make them do so they get to do what they want them to do. And back in those days, they really believed they had no scientists and had no scientific explanation to anything. So people kind of believe that there must be a god of the sea, a god of the this, and a god of the that, because otherwise, how would it be would it exist? So it's kind of funny though, the way people thought back then, whereas now we are very scientific, right? Okay, Nathaniel, can you continue? Odysseus? Nathaniel?
Which one, miss?
Odysseus here. Odysseus was very grateful for the food.
Odysseus was very grateful for the food. While he ate hungrily, the girls packed up the wash clothes. Then Nausicaa called to Odysseus, "We are going back to the city now. I am sure you will understand when I ask you to follow with my friends only as far as the city gates. Inside the city, I must be more careful of my reputation. You can imagine what people will say if they see me with a handsome stranger. They will guess that I have refused all the men from local families and chosen a foreign husband instead, or that a god has taken me as his wife. That kind of talk will not help me to find a good husband when the time comes. So we will leave you at the entrance to the city. Give us time to return to the palace, then join us there later. In the city, look at no one and ask no questions. My people are great sailors, thanks to Poseidon, with the fastest ships in the world, but they are not always good hosts. When you enter the palace, look for my mother, Queen Arete. She usually sits next to my father in the great hall, and as the daughter of the last king, she is as powerful and popular as King Alcinous himself. Throw your arms around her knees and ask for her help. If she feels pity for your situation, you will soon see your homeland again."
Yeah, so basically you see here that the goddess Athena kind of helps Odysseus to get favor with the king, so they will help him in advance to reach his homeland, right? That's the whole idea, so he gets to go home. Odysseus willingly agreed to the plan, and at the entrance to the city, he waited while the princess and her friends returned to the palace. Athena threw a magic fog over him so that no one could see him as he walked through the city. When he reached the gates of the palace, he was almost blinded by the shining lights that met his eyes. Hanging on silver posts were two great doors of gold, and inside were hundreds of beautiful works of art, also made of gold. Around the palace was a brightly colored garden full of tall fruit trees. Still protected by Athena's magic fog, he entered the palace, and he found the great hall and walked unseen past a long table of Phaeacians eating dinner. And when he got to Queen Aretha's seat, he threw his arms around her knees, and at the same moment Athena lifted the fog from his shoulders, and everyone in the room looked at him in shock. Okay, that's the end of chapter 3. And basically in this part, we can see that the goddess Athena kind of just helped him out. So he gets favored. And with that favor, he probably gets a ride home, you know, a sail home. That's the whole thing. Okay, so in chapter 3, we read how Odysseus is trying to get back to his homeland, Ithaca. Yeah, where that is his kingdom. Are there any questions today, guys? So we learned about point of view, first and third, and we know now that this story is written definitely from the third person point of view, but also that the author Homer likes to switch, yeah? In chapter 1 and 2, the focus is on Telemachus, and in chapter 3, in this case, the focus switches to Odysseus. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I will see you on Thursday. For the class secretaries, please make sure that you send me the attendance of today, who was late and who was absent. Yeah, and everybody else, have a great day. I'll see you Thursday. God bless you. Bye-bye.